testimony, offers to buy and sell. Now, if you modify somebody else's work in this category, what you're doing is misrepresenting that person's views. That's not socially useful. So there's no reason why people should be free to publish modified versions of these works. And that means we could have a compromised copyright system where everybody is free to non-commercially redistribute exact copies of these works. However, to modify them or to distribute them commercially or use them commercially requires permission. This compromised copyright system would get rid of the nasty thing in today's copyright law. The thing that makes copyright law so nasty today is the fact that it restricts the general public so that it is not easy to enforce. It now requires invading everybody's home and computer. It's not uncontroversial because it's not uncontroversial to sue teenagers for hundreds of thousands of dollars or put them in, or their parents in prison. And it's no longer beneficial because the freedom we give up is too much. But this compromised copyright system gives us back the most essential part of the freedom, and that is the freedom to share. So that it turns copyright law back into an industrial regulation applied to publishers. So this compromised copyright system will generate a revenue stream more or less as the existing copyright system does, but without the nastiness of it. Well, that's the second category. What about the third category? Artistic and entertainment works, whose purpose is simply in what it feels like to look at or listen to the work. Well, it took me a long time to figure out a good position on modification of these works. And the reason is there are valid arguments on both sides. The argument against the modification is that some of these works have an artistic integrity, and modifying them can destroy that integrity. And I believe that's sometimes true, but not as often as the authors say, when you consider how ready they are to let Hollywood butcher their works in exchange for enough money. Most of them, that is. There are occasional exceptions. But then on the other side, for modified versions, we have to recognize that they can contribute to art. Consider, for instance, the folk process, by which a series of many people transforming a work can produce something rich and beautiful. But if we want to look at known, named authors, consider Shakespeare. Many of Shakespeare's plays use stories taken from other plays that had been published a few decades before. And so, if today's copyright law had been in effect then, those plays of Shakespeare would have been illegal, and we would never have seen them or read them. And the copyright holders would have said, well, you're not missing anything. Those would have been cheap rip-offs. Why should anybody be able to make cheap rip-offs? Of course, since we have seen those plays, we say that some of them are among the masterworks of human literature. But we can only say that because we've seen them. We would be unable to judge for ourselves if we had never seen them. We would be unable to say that that copyright holder who says it's a cheap rip-off was wrong. So there are arguments on both sides about modifying these artistic works. But one thing is clear. It's not desperately urgent to make these modified versions. If you have an idea for how to make a different version of a play that might be interesting in its own way, it's good for you to be able to do that, but it can wait a while. Like it can wait 10 years for the other play to go into the public domain. So we can use the same compromised copyright system where everybody is free to distribute exact copies non-commercially, but all modification and commercial use require permission, as now. And then eventually the copyright expires, and then people can make their modified versions as a further contribution to art. So this will produce a revenue stream, more or less as now, and thus we can expect these works will continue to be produced. Now, one consequence of this compromised copyright system is music sharing on the internet, in fact sharing of any kind of published work, must be legal. Sharing is friendship. To attack sharing is to attack the bonds of society. The record companies want us to believe that this would be a disaster for musicians. It's nonsense. The fact is, the contracts that the record companies sign with musicians are so exploitative that nearly all the records in a record store give the musicians no money. When I buy a commercial CD, which I do from time to time, that's mostly how I get music, I feel ashamed because I'm not supporting the musicians. I know that they're going to get nothing. Now you might wonder, how could that be true? Isn't there a certain fraction that's supposed to go to the musicians? Well, theoretically there is. But the record contract says that the production and publicity expenses are treated as an advance to those musicians. So that fraction that supposedly is for the musicians actually is just put into a different account in the record company where it serves to repay, supposedly, part of this advance that the musicians didn't actually get. And very few records actually sell enough copies that they finish repaying these advances and actually give the musicians some money. Very, very few. Now, this doesn't mean that having a record contract is of no benefit to the musicians, because they do get the benefits of the publicity, which means they get more people coming to their concerts, and they probably get to do more concerts. So that's how they make money, and they probably can sell things at their concerts, and they make money from that too. So the publicity does do some good for them, but there's more than one way to give musicians publicity for their music. The current way, because it's driven by business money, operates on hype. And that's not healthy for music. So I think we should get rid of it. We'll be better off without it. Music will be better off without it. And instead, we can give musicians publicity by sending a copy of the music to friends. Say, here this is, listen to it, do you like it? It'll do the same job. And so the only musicians that will actually lose are the